What is up guys, Dzeeff here. Welcome back to another Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel video. In today's discussion, I wanted to show you my new and improved Skull Servant deck. So a few days ago, I posted a video with Skull Servants. That was my first time playing Grass Skull Servants in years. But over the past few days, I've been playing this deck a lot off stream, and I really wanted to show you guys some of the improvements that I made. I've changed up the deck list, I've gotten better with the combos. So in today's video, I wanted to show you that deck list as well as some gameplay. So here is the deck list that I'll show you guys real quick before we jump into the gameplay. Now I talked about this deck a few days ago, so we've gone over a lot of these cards. The big change this time around is that I've cut the Shaddoll monsters from the main deck, and that not only opens up extra deck spots, but it also opens up some main deck spots as well. So one of the biggest new additions to this deck is the Nemesis set of cards. We have 3 copies of Nemesis Flag, 3 copies of Nemesis Corridor, and 1 copy of Nemesis Umbrella. These cards are really good in this deck. They throw free material on the board for link summoning, and obviously you can use the Corridor for Thunder Dragon Colossus, which really does help out your turn 1 play. Overall, I think this deck is a lot more well-rounded than the previous version, and I've learned a lot of the Skull Servant combos over the past few days. I'll go through the deck list real quick though, just in case you guys don't know what these cards are. We have 3 copies of Skull Servant, 3 copies of King, 3 copies of White Mare, 3 copies of White Prince, 3 copies of White Baking, 3 copies of Maxi, 3 copies of Flag, 3 copies of the Lady in White, 2 copies of Unizami, 3 copies of White Princess, 3 copies of Ash, 1 copy of Umbrella, 3 copies of Mizuki, 3 copies of Shiranui Solitaire, 3 copies of Snow, 2 copies of Gozuki, 3 copies of Corridor, 1 copy of 1-for-1, 3 Grass, 3 Lightning Storm, 3 Droplet, and 3 Infinite Impermanence. For the extra deck, which is pretty different this time around, we have Colossus, and then we have Psyframe Lord, Zeta, and Omega. I think Zeta is a pretty good level 7 synchro for this deck. We also have Chaos Ruler, a fantastic level 8 synchro monster. We have 1 of the Leerlisk assembled Nightingale to summon Zeus, 1 copy of Downard to go with that, as well as the Zeus, 1 copy of Abyss Dweller, that's a pretty great rank 4 right now, 1 copy of Link Kribo, 1 copy of Helk, 1 copy of Nightmare Phoenix, 1 copy of IP Masquerena, 1 copy of Nightmare Unicorn, 1 copy of Appaloosa, and 1 copy of Access Code Talker. Now I will mention here in a couple of the gameplay clips from today's video, you will see me playing Shaddoll monsters, but I wasn't really able to summon any Shaddoll fusion monsters. I found over time that that engine got a lot brickier than I thought it would be, so basically after that original video where I was playing a lot of Shaddoll monsters, I did eventually slim it down to just 5. So if you want to play the Shaddoll cards in this deck, all you really need to play is 3 copies of Shaddoll Fusion, 1 copy of Shaddoll Beast, and 1 copy of Shaddoll Dragon, if I can find that. So if you really want to play that engine in this deck, you certainly can. It does make Grass a little bit better, but I found these cards to be pretty bricky. They're not very good going first, and a lot of the times going second, especially considering how many Eldritch players there are in this game, you can't actually even resolve Shaddoll Fusion from deck, which is really sad. Before we go into the gameplay though, I wanted to shout out yesterday's video, just in case you guys missed it. I uploaded episode 1 of a new series I'm doing with Farfa called Master Saga. It's basically a weekly sealed only Yu-Gi-Oh series. I know there's a lot of those going around right now, but we thought it would be fun to try one of those out in Master Duel, and so far it's been a blast. Real quick before the gameplay, I wanted to show you guys a short clip that kind of shows some of the cooler moments that happened in episode 1. I'll make sure to link the video at the end of today's video as well as in the description below. Evil Swarm Exciton Knight? No way!
Cards on field. 44! Wow! I can't believe we're on episode 1, we're already declaring damage step.
Anyway, I'll show a few duels with this deck in today's video, but we're not doing live commentary. I'm simply going to talk about this Skull Servant deck as the gameplay plays in the background. So basically, the big difference with this version of the deck compared to the original version that I posted a couple days ago is that this one actually has a lot of fantastic turn 1 plays. That not only is a result of me switching up the extra deck and the main deck, but also it's a result result of me actually learning how to play 60 card Skull Servants. Skull Servants have a ton of combo potential. Oftentimes you can end on Omega and Appaloosa with 4 material with a Snow Engrave on turn 1, and if you draw any of the Nemesis cards, you can also end on Colossus. Now Nemesis Umbrella is a bit awkward because that one adds a Nemesis from a grave to hand, but I liked it as a one-of when you open Grass because sometimes you mill all the Nemesis cards without any way to get them back to your hand. So overall, I think the 7-card Nemesis engine is a really great addition to this deck. I think the big reason that engine is so good is because every single combo in this deck is able to put 3 cards in the banished zone. You'll always resolve White Prince no matter what your combo is turn 1, so the Nemesis cards are super easy to use. And I think that is a pretty big difference with this deck compared to some other decks with the Nemesis cards, because these cards really have been underutilized in my opinion, and I think the main reason is that a lot of decks out there, even if they do banish pretty frequently, they might not banish like 2 or 3 cards every single turn 1. But with this deck, because we know we are going to have several monsters banished, the Nemesis monsters are almost always live. I don't think I ever dead drew them once in my entire play session with this deck. One of the other reasons that I think this deck is good in Master Duel, besides the fact that we have Grass and Snow legal in this format, is because a lot of people do not play Nibiru in this game. People tend to stick to hand traps like Ash and Veiler and Impermanence and Maxi, of course, which are all great cards by the way, but this deck really does hard lose to Nibiru. You oftentimes cannot summon Appaloosa reliably as your 5th summon, but it is pretty nice in this game because unless your opponent has like toggle off to really mind game you, you'll probably know if they have Nibiru, because once you do that 5th summon, if they suddenly have a response, I mean that kind of shows you that they're going to have a Nibiru in hand. But over the course of like my entire play session, I think I only got Nibiru to like maybe 1 time with this deck because the card is simply not very popular in Master Duel. And I don't think people are wrong for not playing Nibiru, by the way. Personally, I don't think the card is that great in Master Duel because Eldritch is one of the most popular decks in the entire game, but I think that this deck does win a lot more because people are not playing Nibiru. I'm sure you guys have noticed in the gameplay already, but one of the biggest advantages that this deck has is that White Princess and White Prince are not once per turn effects. That means that you can send as many White Princes to the graveyard as you want in one turn, and all of them, if you have the Lady in White and Skull Servant in deck, will trigger to send those cards to the graveyard. And the banish effect is not a once per turn either, so you can put a ton of material on the board for synchro summons and link summons and stuff like that, or you could simply OTK your opponent using King if you're going second. That really is one of the biggest reasons to play Skull Servants in this game. You have really good non-once per turn effects. White Baking does have a very good once per turn effect, but I think that is fine as a once per turn. Usually with the Baking, depending on your hand, you are going to add White Mare plus White Prince. What that allows you to do is discard the White Prince, which puts Skull Servant and Lady in White Engrave, which you can then banish those 3 cards, the Prince, the Lady, and the Skull Servant, to summon a King from your deck. From there, you can use the White Mare to special summon the Lady from your banished pile, and now you have a level 1 monster and a level 3 monster on the board. If you simply summon a Unizombie and only use even one of its effects, you now have enough material for a level 8 synchro, which is a really good play. Oftentimes though, you are using both effects of Unizombie. Ideally that's what you want to do, so in that case the Unizombie plus the Lady in White is a level 8 synchro without using the King. Mizuki isn't a hard once per turn, Snow isn't a hard once per turn. There are so many non-once per turn effects in this deck that it's really easy to put a lot of monsters on the board, which helps set up your big synchro summons or big link summons. One of the things that I like about this deck on turn 1 is that you do have a lot of flexibility. So for example, if you can't get to the full Appaloosa on turn 1 because you can't quite get to 4 monsters on the board to use for it, you could simply make an IP which could turn into Nightmare Unicorn on the opponent's turn. And honestly, that's a good card as well. So even if you can't quite full combo, you still have a pretty good end board, which I think could do at least in one of the gameplays in today's video. Notably, if Grass is still at 3 once they finally add Burst of Destiny to this game, this deck gets even better because instead of ending on like an IP, for example, you can end on Anaconda to make DPE. that would actually make the deck even stronger turn 1, so that would be pretty cool. You could maybe even experiment with a Scythe engine in this deck if you wanted to at that point. But right now we don't have DPE in this game and Dragoon is banned, so obviously there's no reason to play Anaconda, but it is a very good card in this deck once we finally get a good fusion monster to summon on turn 1. I will mention here that in my opinion, this deck's biggest issue is back row decks. You do have Lightning Storm in the main deck. That is one of the reasons why I cut the Shaddoll cards, because Lightning Storm does give you a way to push through back row, and I think if you open Grass, you can play through back row pretty easily as well. But if your opponent is playing a back row deck and they know what your deck is capable of and they simply stop the Unizombie, you usually don't have a huge follow-up. Now, cards like 1-for-1 do help with that. You know, discarding is great, and honestly, Forbidden Droplet, even if it's not negating a bunch of cards, that is a really good extender too, because you have so many cards that you want in the graveyard. Droplet discarding a Mizuki plus a White Princess could actually set you up for a big combo, even if your opponent stopped your original play. So the deck isn't completely useless against back row decks, but those are probably its worst matchup. Overall, while 60-card Skull Servants might not be the most explosive 60-card deck in the game, I think they do have a lot to offer, and it's honestly one of the most fun decks I've played in Master Duel so far. This deck can do all sorts of crazy plays. It oftentimes can OTK with King on turn 1 when you go second, and I really do think it has a lot of versatility. People don't know what your cards do, which is always great when you play a rogue deck, and they might not know what extenders you actually have in your archetype. So if you want to try out a fun 60-card deck, I think this is a perfect choice, but admittedly, looking at the list right now, it's not the cheapest deck out there. If you have other grass decks though, and you already have a lot of the expensive ultra rares for this deck, you can pretty easily craft all of the Skull Servant cards and the Nemesis cards. Those ones are not very high rarity. So if you've already made a grass deck, this deck is not that expensive, but if you haven't made a grass deck, this is going to be a pretty big investment. For that reason, I would say that this deck is not really a budget-friendly deck, but I do think you could make it a bit more budget-friendly by making it a 40-card deck instead of a 60-card deck. Personally though, I mean, grass is just so much fun. The card has not been legal for years in the TCG, so I had to play the 60-card version. It's just so much fun. Anyway, that is all for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and make sure to check out episode 1 of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Saga. There will be a link in the description below. I'll see you later though. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.